Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful psychological ideas ever, an idea born from the absolute depths of human suffering. We're talking about Viktor Frankl's logotherapy.
You know that feeling, that nagging sense that something's missing? Like you can have everything you're supposed to want, but there's still this void. It's a feeling a lot of us know. And it turns out a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl actually gave it a name.
He called it the existential vacuum. And look, this isn't just about having a bad day. He saw it as something much deeper, a real crisis of purposelessness, something he felt was becoming a huge struggle in the modern world. Now, how Frankl framed this is really important. He didn't see this vacuum as a mental illness like, say, clinical depression. Nope, he saw it as more of a spiritual crisis. It's the pain we feel when that fundamental human drive we all have, the drive to find meaning, gets blocked. And this feeling, this void, it doesn't just hang around in the background. Frankl argued it can actually show up in some really serious ways. He called it the mass neurotic triad. So when he looked at things like rising rates of depression, aggression, and addiction, he didn't see them as separate problems. He saw them as symptoms of a society that was losing its grip on purpose.
This is a really crucial distinction he made. He even coined a term for it, noogenic neurosis. It comes from the Greek word nous, for mind or spirit. Basically, it's a type of anxiety that comes from existential frustration. So it's not a problem with your mind, it's a crisis of meaning. And if the problem is meaning, well, the solution has to be about meaning too.
And that solution, that's logotherapy. Frankl actually called it the third Viennese school of psychotherapy. So he saw himself as following in the footsteps of giants like Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler, but also pushing back against them in a big way.
This slide shows you exactly what I mean. It's a huge shift. You know, Freud was all about the will to pleasure. Adler was about the will to power. But Frankl, he came along and said, no, you've both got it wrong. He argued that our primary, most fundamental human drive is the will to meaning. It's that deep, gut-level need for our lives to count for something. Okay, so logotherapy really boils down to three core principles. They're simple, but man, are they powerful. First, life has meaning always, no matter what. Second, our main motivation, what really drives us, is our search for that meaning. And third, and this might be the most important one of all, we are always free to choose our attitude, even when we're facing suffering we can't change.
All right, so if finding meaning is so important, how do we actually do it? It's a great question. Frankl didn't just leave it as a philosophical idea. He laid out three concrete paths we can take.
The first way is by creating something, by doing a deed. It's about what you give to the world. The second path is through experience, what you take from the world. This could be experiencing nature, art, or maybe the most powerful of all, truly connecting with and loving another person. And then there's the third path, the one for when everything else is gone. It's about the attitude we choose to take when we're faced with suffering we simply cannot escape.
But logotherapy isn't just a philosophy to think about. It's also a set of practical tools. Frankl came up with some really specific techniques to help people break out of those vicious cycles of anxiety and fear that, get in the way of finding meaning in the first place.
One of his most famous techniques is called paradoxical intention. And this one is, well, it's pretty wild. It's totally counterintuitive. The idea is, instead of running from your fear, you run towards it. You actually intentionally wish for the very thing you're afraid of. It sounds crazy, right? But what it does is it completely short-circuits the anxiety that feeds the fear.
And here's a perfect story to show how it works. Frankl had a patient, a doctor, who was terrified of sweating in public. So what did Frankl tell him? Not try to relax. No. He told him to go out and try to sweat. He told him to say, I'm going to show them how much a person can sweat. I'm going to pour out 10 liters. And guess what happened? After 4 years of being crippled by this phobia, it was gone in one session. Just like that. He took the fear's power away by leaning into it.
There are a couple other cool techniques too. One is called dereflection. That's all about shifting your focus away from your own problems and onto someone or something else. It helps break that cycle of just obsessing over yourself. Then there's Socratic dialogue, where the therapist doesn't give you answers, but instead asks you questions, guiding questions, to help you discover that, hey, you actually had the answers inside you all along.
So, Frankl's ideas are obviously incredibly powerful. And a big reason for that is his personal story, right? His story of survival. But to really understand the whole picture, we kind of have to peek behind the curtain. We have to look at the man himself, who, it turns out, was a lot more complicated than the public legend.
And look, the point here isn't to tear the guy down or say logotherapy is bogus. It's really about getting a more human, more realistic picture of someone who's often treated like a saint.
Okay, so one of the biggest revelations comes from a historian named Timothy Patel. He dug into the train records, and while there's no question Frankl survived the Holocaust, the records show he was only in Auschwitz for about 3 days, basically in a holding depot before being moved again. That's a really different story from the common perception that he spent years there.
Yeah, that number, 3 days. It's become a huge deal for historians. They ask, why didn't Frankl ever correct the record? Why did he let this story of him being a long-term Auschwitz survivor become so central to his whole public image? And Patel's research found something else, something pretty troubling about Frankl's time before the camps. Between 1940 and 1942, as a neurologist in Vienna, he was performing experimental brain surgeries on Jewish patients who were suicidal. Frankl himself even admitted these were details that were scarcely known to anyone. So for critics like Patel, this stuff is a really big deal. He basically argues that by letting people believe a different version of his story, Frankl left himself wide open to the accusation that he was exploiting the tragedy of Auschwitz to make his therapy seem more profound and to make himself more famous. So, what do we do with all this, right? How do we hold both things at once? The flawed, complicated man and the incredibly profound ideas he brought into the world? Well, I think maybe the answer is that we can separate the man from the message. Learning about the historical complexities, it doesn't have to erase the power of his central idea. That idea is true because of what he observed in other people, even if his own personal story got a little polished along the way. The idea is powerful all on its own.
And that core idea, it's captured perfectly in what is probably his most famous quote of all. This right here is the heart of logotherapy. It's about the defiant strength of the human spirit. It says that no matter what happens to you on the outside, there is one final freedom that no one can ever take from you. The freedom to choose how you respond on the inside.
And that really brings it all back to us, doesn't it? Frankl's whole story, the myth, the reality, all of it, leaves us with this one ultimate question. When you face your own challenges, the things in your life you just can't change, what attitude will you choose? How will you find your meaning?